Hey there guys, so I'm back with another movie review now. I said recently on here that I was going to be reviewing more Batman movies. I have some up already, but I figured I'd review the entire Dark Knight trilogy, so I'm going to be reviewing all the movies in the trilogy, starting with the first one, Batman Begins. So, Batman Begins came out in 2005. I saw this movie when it came out, loved it back in the day, and yeah, the Dark Knight trilogy as a whole is a trilogy that I have mixed feelings on, and I'll try and explain it in this review. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, Batman Begins, starring Christian Bale, directed by Christopher Nolan. Now, I remember when this movie came out, before I saw it, I was kind of apprehensive about it because I was a big fan of the Batman animated series. I loved Batman as a kid, I liked some of the comics, and going into this movie, I wasn't sure what to expect because I didn't know much about Christopher Nolan. I hadn't seen any of his movies prior to this. Christian Bale, I'd seen a couple of his movies prior to this, and I didn't really think that he looked like he would suit Batman. He didn't really look like because Batman in the comics is supposed to be a big, strong, muscular, like athletic, um, really imposing figure. He's kind of like a big heavyweight. And Christian Bale, I wasn't 100% sure whether or not he could portray Batman, but I have to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised. In this movie, I think he did a great job. I think that this movie as a whole was well cast, and I'll get into that later in the review. But basically, this tells the origin story about Batman. The movie starts off, you get a flashback sequence of when he was a child. He falls into a pit, which of course ultimately turns out to be the Batcave, and he gets swarmed by bats. Now, it cuts back and forth between the present day and flashback sequences. And during the present day, Batman is living in the roundabout the Tibetan mountains. He's on the run. He's in and out of prison, fighting criminals from the inside, trying to learn the criminal underworld. Because, as you'll find out throughout the plot, part of the reason why Batman has disappeared and he's on the run is because he's trying to sort of understand the mind of a criminal. Because he's obviously lived a privileged life. He's rich, he has a butler, he didn't want for anything growing up, so he doesn't really understand the mentality of what it's like to be desperate and to experience fear. So he wants to travel the world and experience everything he can so that he can best discover how he can return to Gotham and have a positive influence and find a way to fight crime. So it makes sense for him to do this. Now, he is then adopted and taken under the wing of a man named Henry Ducard, played by Liam Neeson, who, of course, as you guys know if you've seen this movie, he turns out to be one of the antagonists of the movie, which I'll get to later. Liam Neeson is fantastic in this movie. This, in my opinion, is one of Liam Neeson's best performances as an actor. I think he was really well cast here, and a lot of the early sequences in this movie have a lot to do with pretty much the first act of the movie has a lot to do with Liam Neeson training Bruce Wayne, teaching him how to fight, teaching him to be ruthless, teaching him to be stealthy, teaching him martial arts, teaching him to be sort of merciless towards crime, and really instilling the vigilante mindset into Batman. And basically, the training sequences that you get early on, you see them doing things like sword fighting, doing all sorts of balance training, all sorts of martial arts, and it's really interesting. I really did enjoy it. And they also have a couple of one-on-ones where he tells Batman sort of little bits from his past and what sort of motivated him to go to the mountains and to become a vigilante and to dedicate himself to fighting crime. And I thought that the dialogue in those instances was really heartwarming, and I really liked it. And of course, during this time, you get a lot of flashbacks, you get a lot of information as to things that happened to Bruce Wayne, what happened to him while he was younger, when his parents were murdered, and how that sort of impacted his life and changed him. You get the sense from that moment on, he was basically dead inside. He was no longer the same person, and all he could think about was how he could conquer fear and how he could avenge his parents, and not only avenge his parents, but also how he can fight crime. And yeah, the whole first act of this movie's a very slow burner. It's a long movie, it's a slowly paced movie, and that's something that in action movies I don't tend to like. However, here I think it was necessary because they were telling an origin story. And when you're telling an origin story, particularly as it pertains to a character that's very popular from comics, I think it's important to have the right amount of character development and the right amount of expedition, and they do have it here. Like I said, there's plenty of character development. You get to see Bruce Wayne really evolve as a character in this movie, and he doesn't actually become Batman until midway through the movie. I'd say at least halfway through is when you first get an appearance of him in the Bat costume and some cool action sequences and whatnot. So yeah, one of the things I also love about this movie is the realism of it. There's nothing really unbelievable or supernatural that goes on in this movie. The villains in this movie are very down to earth, very ground, street level villains. One of the villains in this movie who I'd say plays a predominant role in what happens to Batman and how Batman becomes who he is Carmine Falcone, played by Tom Wilkinson. Really, really like Tom Wilkinson as an actor. I think he's a really talented British actor, and he plays the mob boss for Carmine Falcone, who basically runs Gotham. This guy unofficially is the ruler of Gotham. He has everybody in his pocket. He has politicians, he has lawyers, he has cops, he has drug dealers, thugs, pretty much everybody in the city who is connected to organized crime has to go through him. This guy is connected to everybody, and he's also, at the same time, he doesn't get his hands dirty, so the police, or the police that are actually trying to get this guy and trying to get this guy out of there, they can't seem to touch him. He's basically untouchable. He rules the city through fear and intimidation, and that's a big theme in this movie, is fear. You get a few expedition scenes where they talk about how, as long as this guy keeps keeps the bad people rich and the good people scared, nobody will touch him. And I really like the way that was portrayed. I think Tom Wilkinson is a really good actor. I think he was very intimidating in this movie. And yeah, he, like I said, he's one of the main antagonists for at least the first half of the movie. One of the other villains in the movie, which plays a predominant role more so towards the end, is Jonathan Crane, the Scarecrow, portrayed by Cillian Murphy. Again, Cillian Murphy's another actor I like. I like him in a lot of movies. I remember he was in the movie Red Eye, which I believe came out the year before this. He was the villain in that movie. I've seen him in many movies, Cillian Murphy. I think he's a talented and somewhat versatile actor. And I think he did a really good job as a villain here because he's kind of campy and nerdy, but not so much to the point where it's irritating. He's a guy who basically he's a psychologist. He runs the mental institution, Arkham, and he's just he's a guy who you'd see him and you wouldn't think he was intimidating. You wouldn't think he was a villain. You wouldn't think he was particularly dangerous. And that's what makes him more dangerous in the movie. And towards the end, that's what makes him more imposing, because he strongly believes in the power of the mind over the body. This is a guy that's not all about violence and power and intimidation. This is a guy that's all about psychological stuff. It's basically psychological warfare when it comes to this guy. He will chemically induce fear, and he'll manipulate people, and because he runs the nut house, basically the asylum, he basically does like experiments on this people and fucks with their brains and their minds, and he's a real absolute psychopath. You get a real sense that this guy is an absolute flipping psychopath. And that was one of the things that made him more interesting to me as a villain. He's actually one of the more believable villains that I've seen throughout this entire series, as far as I'm concerned. I thought he did a great job. I think he was a really cool villain. Again, he's not like a cliche, super powered villain, a guy who's intimidating and brutal. No, he's a guy who's very psychological and who does everything through the mind. And that's what I really liked about him. And the plot that Batman has to ultimately contend with, which I won't spoil, this guy has a lot to do with it. Basically, it's involving Gotham tearing itself apart through chemically induced fear, and I really thought it was an intriguing plot, which I really liked. And the other villain in the movie, which, minor spoiler alert here, but I guess you guys who are listening to this probably already know this, but the other villain that is in this movie is I mentioned earlier Liam Neeson, who plays Henry Ducard. Well, Henry Ducard is actually Ra's al Ghul. Now, Ra's al Ghul is a really complex villain from the Batman comics. He's somewhat underpowered here than he was in the comics, and I like that. I like that they kept it simple. I like that it was more realistic and more believable. But he runs this League of Vigilantes called the League of Assassins. They're basically a secret society of vigilantes who, for centuries, have been fighting crime from the shadows, and basically their whole shtick is when a particular city or a particular country gets overflown with crime or gets too wild and to control, they will just wipe the place out and start again, if you know what I mean. And yeah, they're basically a group of real control freaks that Batman has to deal with. But what's interesting to me is it's sort of an internal struggle for Batman, because he learned from these people. You know, he learned from Ra's al Ghul how to be who he is. So Ra's al Ghul, in a sense, kind of creates Batman. You know, he kind of lets a fire under his ass and makes him do what he does. So that this to me is a villain that's really conflicted. You know, it's a villain that plays a real predominative role in what goes on with Batman. And one of the things I like about it too is the action sequences in this movie involving Liam Neeson are actually some of the best. I think the fight scene towards the end, there's a fight scene on a train which was really good. I really like that fight scene. You see a lot of like real martial arts involved, and Liam Neeson's a guy who used to be a boxer when he was a kid. He was an amateur boxer, and of course, the years following this movie, the years after it, he did involve himself in a lot of action movies. So he's a guy who was really good as a villain in this movie, and I really think that not only as a villain but as a mentor, he also did a great job in this movie. And he's a very talented character actor, if you know what I mean, Liam Neeson, and I just thought he did a real good job in this movie. And yeah, the fight sequence towards the end between him and Batman was really well done. It was my favourite action sequence of this movie. The love interest in the movie, played by Katie Holmes, I believe her name is. Katie Holmes plays the love interest, Rachel. She did a serviceable job, I guess. I mean, I know that she did get a lot of criticism for her role in the movie, but I don't really understand it. I don't really think she did a bad job at all. I mean, she was this, district attorney who knew Batman growing up. She was a close friend, and he kind of had a thing for her. You know, she had a thing for him. It doesn't really go anywhere, and it didn't really need to go anywhere. But she's there. You know, she's in the movie. She provides a lot of the real emotional scenes, a lot of the dialogue, and you get the sense that she's sort of an idealist, trying to clean up the city herself, but she's not really getting any support from anybody, anybody in the police or the DA office until Batman comes along and provides the ray of light that she's been looking for. And yeah, I thought she did a serviceable job. I had no problem with it, really. They didn't really force a love story out of this movie, which I like, because it didn't need that, really. But there's plenty of character development with her. She does play a role in the plot, which is, again, serviceable. I had no problem with it. One of the things that I've seen be criticised about this movie is some of the action sequences. They're sort of choppily edited, and I don't really like that in action movies. But I think the reason they went for that in this movie is to kind of show you the action from the perspective of the criminals, because the whole thing about Batman and a big theme in this movie is fear. And there's one scene in particular which I absolutely loved, and it's a scene where there's these guys, these thugs at docks, and they're sort of bringing in shipments of drugs. And while this is going on, Batman is stalking them and picking them off one at a time. And it kind of reminded me of the movie Predator. If you guys have never seen Predator, it's a really cool action movie where the Predator is sort of invisible. It's hiding in the trees. These people can't see it. They can't see where it's coming from. And they're absolutely traumatized and terrified. And it's picking them off one by one. And there's even a scene where there's a bunch of guys all standing around, all these thugs, and Batman just drops in the middle of them and kicks all their asses. And you can't really see what's going on, but it's sort of a disorienting type of action sequence where, you're seeing it from their perspective as if you're getting your ass kicked and you don't know what's hit you. And I actually did kind of like that in this movie. If you guys haven't played the video game based on this movie, the Batman Begins video game, I actually reviewed it on my gaming channel if you want to check that out. But in that video game, it kind of shows you it from Batman's perspective, where you kind of stalk the people and take them out one by one, and then use like fear and intimidation tactics to weaken them in a group before jumping in and going into combat. And I really like that game. And in this movie, it shows you it from their perspective rather than Batman's perspective, and I actually did like that. I think it was a really wise choice by Christopher Nolan to incorporate the fear element into the action sequences, which I really like. So I like the action sequences in this movie. I like that they went that route. It's one of the few movies that I can actually say that the choppy edits actually did enhance the experience. Um, as for the as for things like shaky cam and all that, there's no shaky cam in this movie, which I do like, because a lot of modern day action movies do use shaky cam. There's none of that in this movie. There's lots of wide shots. You can see for the most part where the characters are and what they're playing at. So to me, the action in this movie is fine. I had no issue with it. Okay, there is a sword fight earlier in the movie between Bruce Wayne and Liam Neeson, which I thought, it was sort of a training sequence, but it was a sword fight where there's plenty of wide shots, and it takes place on like a frozen lake. I thought that was really cool. I like that action sequence. So I think this movie, in terms of its action, absolutely badass action, really good. In terms of the acting in the movie, again, I think everybody in the movie is well cast. The guy who played Thomas Wayne, I can't remember the guy's name, but he did a good job as Thomas Wayne in the flashback sequences. He plays Bruce Wayne's father. And I felt that, the scenes between the two of them, you get the sense that Bruce was very close to his father. You don't get much dialogue from the mother, but that didn't really bother me, to be honest. There's a couple of characters in the movie, like you had Michael Caine as Alfred. I think Michael Caine did a good job as Alfred. I'm a big fan of Michael Caine. I like a lot of his movies. If you guys ever seen the movie Harry Brown, which came out in 2009, I've got a review for that on my channel. Really like that movie starring Michael Caine. A really good character actor. Really like him as an actor. He was my favorite portrayal of Alfred, in my opinion. Yeah, you had Lucius Fox. He was played by Morgan Freeman. I'm not actually a big fan of Morgan Freeman. I think Morgan Freeman is overrated as an actor. The character of Lucius Fox in this movie, I get that he's there. He's sort of the Batman's head scientist. He creates the gadgets for him and helps him design his suit and stuff like that. I thought that he did an okay job, but I think that there was one sequence in particular which I didn't like. It was a scene near the end where they had a whole, thing where Lucius Fox gets fired, and then the guy who fires him says, "Didn't you get the memo?" And then there was a whole scene at the end where they sort of recreated that scene, but it was in a particular way where I felt, was this whole thing set up? Was everybody in the board in on this? Was the whole thing set up so he could just say, "Didn't you get the memo?" And yeah, I didn't like that scene at all. I thought it was just it kind of made Morgan Freeman's character out to be a little bit of an asshole. But that's just a little nitpick I have with the movie. I mean, again, it's just my personal taste. I'm not into that kind of forced humor. Other than that, there was no forced humor in this movie. I did like the scene where he's in the Batmobile and Morgan Freeman asks him, "What do you think?" And he just goes, "Does it come in black?" I thought that was funny. Again, it wasn't forced, it was natural. So yes, there's a few funny scenes here and there. It's a good movie, particularly the scene too where where Liam Neeson sees Batman fly down and he just drops in front of him and he sees it. He's dressed as a bat and he goes, "Well, you took my advice about theatrics a bit literally." I thought that was funny, man. Yeah. So yeah, there's a few funny jokes in this movie which actually do work, and yeah, I think this is a really good movie, man. I think it's a solid. I give this movie a solid 9 out of 10. I love this movie. It's my favorite live action Batman movie. I don't know if it's my favorite Batman movie. I said in my review for Batman Under the Red Hood, if you haven't seen my review for that, I uploaded it the other day. If you guys haven't seen my review for that, then you'll know that was my favorite animated Batman movie. I'm not sure which of the two I like better. I would say maybe I like that slight bit more, because I gave that a 10 out of 10. But I'll give this one a 9 out of 10. I think it's a solid movie, great Batman movie. Yeah, my favorite live action Batman portrayal. So that's me done with this review. Stay tuned for my review for The Dark Knight. I don't know when that review will be out, sometime within the next week, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to be reviewing The Dark Knight, so let me know what you guys think, and thanks for watching. God bless.